Hello, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. To start with, here's a question I hear comments about all the time. It's in the form of a question. It says, what is your opinion of the frenzy of soccer mothers? Well, since the inquirer, the person who posed the question, used the word frenzy, I guess I'm expected to agree that it's sort of a hassle. And I guess I do. I see some of these people listen, observe to the frantic efforts they make trying to put things together, coming home from work, getting things together quickly, and then off they go to pick up or distribute people to soccer practice or the games or whatever. And it's a real hassle. So some of the frenzy in it, right after soccer, it's basketball, and then on and on and on it goes. But I watch some of these people and I wonder how much nicer it used to be. When the youngsters came home from school, there was snack there, typically prepared. The house was already clean. There was not the big hustle and the bustle. People could have what some people call a structured meal, sit down together, eat, and then go off if wanted to play games or something after school. Soccer moms are either one-parent families or they're two-job families. And these one-parent family situations where the mother is trying to do everything, I really feel sorry for them. It is a hectic pace. I've observed it. And happy to say we did without a few things, but my family never had to go through that, and I'm glad. And I'm well aware that just immediately people will say, well, I can't afford not to have two jobs in a family, or we have to do this, we have to do that. I'm aware of the economics as well. The question was, what's my opinion of soccer moms, and I think they're overstressed. Here's another question. Don't hear much about these much anymore, but the question is, are second marriages today working out? Second marriages. You know, we hear all kinds of people saying, well, we'll get married when we find out whether or not it's going to work. I even heard a couple say recently who's expecting a child that they plan to get married in a couple of years if it works out. You know, the puzzling. Something's wrong with the picture. This was a planned child, but they don't know if their relationship is going to work out. Somebody put the cart before the horse. Sure, a lot of people today don't even know what a horse is or a cart either, but something's wrong when people do things that way. But to get back to the question, second marriages have always been less stable than first marriages. I say always. It used to be sort of a simple rule of thumb. The numbers showed second marriages had twice as many breakups as the first marriage. The third marriage had twice as many breakups as the second marriage. Well, today, it's a little harder to pin things down because so many people aren't getting married, but the failure rate of second marriages today, on the latest figures that I've seen, is 60%. It still runs 60%, in spite of all these trial relationships and people going through all the antics of trying to make sure everything is just right. 60% failure rate. Now, I think when people enter a second relationship, second marriage, they really need to get pre-marriage counseling. Now, unfortunately, there aren't very many people around who counsel who are really family-oriented. They're individual counselor-oriented. But what they need to do, what they really should do is consider when you start mixing families, when you start looking at a family, you're mixing relationships. There are family systems that are already in place. There are questions of who's responsible and who has authority. In other words, a step-parent comes in. What's happening here? Is a step-parent going to have authority over a child? And if so, at what age? What about the discipline? What about the punishment? Some biological parents want the step-parent to have all the authority in the world and to be responsible except in dispensing any kind of discipline. And it's It's a problem that needs to be worked out. These things are not simple. You always mix families. And to me, it's small wonder that step families and step parenting has a bad rep. But you know, step parents don't have any problems really that the biological parents don't really come across too. There's a different basis for the relationship. I'm aware of that. That's the way I think about step families and second marriages. Yeah, they need some help to start with and to clarify. They just sit down and talk about these things. Most people don't. Most people won't even consider that. Here's another one. It says, is it possible that sometimes people with emotional and mental problems would be better off without treatment? Simple answer, yes. But it's very difficult to find a counselor, a therapist, a psychiatrist who's willing to put that on paper. Because we live in a litigious society, one that sues you for everything or nothing. But it is true that sometimes people get worse the more somebody attempts to help them. I've seen it. I've certainly read and observed others. And it's a struggle to come to that conclusion. In spite of your very best efforts sometimes, you see people who aren't responding the way it's intended, and everybody doing the right things as far as the book goes, and everybody with good intentions, but things get worse. I recall one particular situation where the history of this person, it seemed to me, had been to many specialists, even to Boston. And it seemed to me that every time this person went to a specialist, something else was brought up, and the person's adjustment in life was getting steadily worse. I finally came to the conclusion that what this person needed was to back off, become her own person, in her own way. Quit trying to be what all these therapists and counselors and really fancy people, some of them, high prices and very good names. Quit trying to be what other people wanted her to be. Well, you'd have thought I'd have hit her in the head with something when I told her that, because she was really upset with me. My husband was really upset with me. I was on the verge of being sued for abandonment, but stuck to my guns and said, just watch it a while and see what happens. And I'm happy to say I've seen a couple, family, children, grandchildren, seen them several times. They've been doing much better, and I would consider them doing well today. Sometimes I tell people who bring problem situations, I say, let's don't make a federal case out of it. Let's don't blow it out of proportion. Because some people, because of whatever is going on, reading books, magazines, everybody's getting involved in self-help books and special diagnosing. Sometimes they come with such preset notions. I had one recently tell me, well, I want to see you for this particular problem, and I know you have to see me for 10 times before you can make a decision. Gave me the whole scenario. I never set any records like that. Where'd you get the idea that I have to see you 10 times before I have an opinion? I haven't said it. That's not the way I work. Well, this is what's said in so-and-so in a certain book. Well, sure, okay. I'm very familiar with programs, how they work sometimes. But sometimes people don't need professional help. What they need is a friend, socialization, support group, and guess where the support group is most of the time? It used to be the family. If your family was with you, there wasn't any problem you couldn't overcome. For most simple adjustment problems, I'm well aware there are specific problems that need specific therapies and specialists to help. I'm not denying that at all. But to answer the question, yes, sometimes people need to just cool it, take care of themselves. Here's another one. There have been some books and talk show comments about gender training and the possible influence and the problems they produce. What do you think of that? Well, for about 30 or 40 years, I've been thinking that's the wrong thing to do. I've seen a lot of it, a lot of efforts, and we're seeing all kinds of things. Mostly these programs have been directed against boys. The boys who are just boys. If you ever watched puppies play, little dogs, oh, they bark and snap and growl, and they're practicing. But did you ever see the puppies hurt each other? Well, the boys are like that. More so than girls. Girls are more often compared to cats, I know, but yeah. I think to try to change the nature of a person, such as that's what those programs are often into, and too often they're directed at the boys, to get the boys to be less aggressive, boys to be more passive, not to fight, not to scuffle. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's a program that should be tolerated, and yet most of these things occur, particularly with federal funding. Somebody gets the idea that boys aren't supposed to have testosterone. They're not supposed to be aggressive. Well, even some of the dyed-in-the-wool feminist researchers have found that there are differences between boys and girls in their temperaments and their adjustments, which are perfectly normal. And I think what the world needs, we need good men, good women. We don't need whatever it is in the middle. That's bad. But you know, so many of the programs, and we see it all the time, and there's a lot of hullabaloo even in the political races about getting more and more preschool and pre-preschool and pre-kindergarten and pre-whatever. We're moving children out of the families. We're moving children into cadres, into compounds, into group settings. You know who did that? Communist Party. Communist Party was against families because it was a waste of energy. That if you had community kitchens and community nurseries, it'd work better and you get more work and more efficiency out of people who were then cogs in the big wheel. Well, the Nazis did the same thing. They had training camps for children to change their ways. Kind of a puzzle, isn't it? I don't think those are the efforts behind our federal government. I hope they aren't. I have not heard of it, and I don't have that thought. But the social engineering of having pre-kindergarten, pre-this and pre-that, what's the purpose? To put the mother to work? To get her out of the home? That's certainly been planned. I have it in writing that that's the intention of certain programs, and sponsored and funded by the federal government. Well, it's a puzzle, isn't it? It's related to the next question. It says there's much emphasis on training children today to help them develop self-esteem. And what's it based on? The question is, what is self-esteem based on? Yes, I've listened and watched many educators get into this self-esteem training. And what they're trying to do is to teach people to value themselves. There's not anything wrong with that. Great. That's what most therapists try to do, is to help people have better self-esteem, to value themselves more. But what's it based on? I think it's based on instinct. I know I'm going way out on a limb to say something like that, but so what? Instinct, for example, the little child, the infant, you see it develop if you've been around children, raised a family. You see children who have that mind. They grab their mind, they protect what's mine. And But I'm saying I think it's a natural tendency for children to feel possessive and to become even aggressive about that. Well, we have to educate them along the way, as all of us were, that we can't get along in this world if that's the only way we can be. That we have to learn to adjust and to accommodate and to get along with other people to some extent. But I think that self-esteem is based on what's mine is best, and I'm going to protect mine. I think that's where the origin is. Now, self-esteem is valuing oneself. If you value yourself, then you can value other people. If you don't value yourself, you have too many problems trying to get along with others. I didn't originate that thought. That's as old as the second greatest commandment. It's part of Scripture. If you value yourself, you can value others. That's great. But what's it based on? I think it's based on something very simple, like the inherited tendency, innate tendency to be possessive and to have whatever is for me and whatever is mine is better than yours. Until another time, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. Have a good one. Hello, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. Start off today with a question about suicides. The question was, have I ever worked with anybody who committed suicide? No one I have worked with and was working with at the time has committed suicide since 1953. That's a good long ways, isn't it? 47 years ago. Well, I learned a lot from that person, and happy to say that I've learned it, and I think I've helped a lot of other people. I used to teach a course, graduate and undergraduate, called Suicidology, which was how to help prevent suicide. I originated that over at Plattsburgh State. I helped train some of the first trainers in the crisis center. And they develop and they do a lot of good work. But I'm happy to say I haven't had one. I've had some near misses sometimes. And interestingly enough, all the people I've ever worked with who attempted suicide, and that's usually when I step in, I've never had one who was sorry they didn't die, except right at the moment. I remember one guy he wanted to finish the job when I was called in, and he was even arguing with people in the emergency room at the hospital where I was called by the family to see him. Well, every cell in the body wants to live, and I'm not sure what part of the person wants to die. I know it's a serious intent at times, but to answer the question, happy to say no, not since '53. I haven't had anybody I've was working with, that I know of, commit suicide. And obviously, that many years ago, there may have been some, I just haven't heard. Here's another question. So I was recently in a discussion about modern dress or clothing. It has caused many squabbles in our family. What do you think about clothing in families? Yes, I've listened to a lot of squabbles in the family. What's appropriate? What is the best dress? Clothing in every society is a symbol. It's a uniform. Making there what society, what culture you study, the clothing is part of the identity. Some of it's reasonable to outsiders, some of it isn't. But it makes sense to the people in that particular society. And I've wondered if we're seeing so many changes in styles and fashions these days. It's really a very rapid changing scenario. I think, for example, men's ties, you can't even keep up with them. How often the style changes, the fashions change. going to be wide, they're going to be narrow, they're going to be striped, they're going to be polka dot, they're going to be whatever. It's hard to keep up. Same way, of course, with women's fashions. Men's fashions used to be pretty steady compared to the women. There's a style that I find rather disconcerting and difficult for me to get along with in my own family. Of course, I had 7 children, have 7 children, and a few grandchildren. And this is this thing called dressing down, they call it. You know, it used to be, I remember when some of my girls were teenagers, it looked at me and I saw this college. And some people's intention was to start to college wearing blue jeans and graduate wearing the same jeans. So ragged, so torn, patches on top of patches, dressing down. Even the banks get into it, don't they? They have a casual day or whatever. You buy clothes and it's fashionable to have them that are what do they call it? Anyway, they look like they've been worn for a year or two before you buy them, and that's intentional. Pre-washed and pre-this and pre-whatever. I don't like clothes that way. Because when I grew up, you bought a pair of slacks, new ones, you wanted them to last you a while. And to buy some of these things that are frazzled and faded to start with, that didn't appeal to me. That was time to go out and buy something else. But that too is a uniform. That's as much of a uniform as somebody else wearing whatever I'm wearing, or somebody else trying to look a little better and different. Dressing down gives a symbol that you can also dress up, and dressing down is supposed to be symbolic that there's more to the person than what's on the outside. That's true. But it sort of reminds me, it's a true story about a woman who talked to me one time, and I went to see her in the hospital, and she was upset. Her cardiologist had come into her room for his first visit, and she was telling me, you know, a man came in here, he looked like he was Huckleberry Finn. He was dressed like Huckleberry Finn. And I asked him, who are you? And he said he was Dr. So-and-so, her cardiologist. She didn't believe it. Nobody walks in here dressed like you are, pretending to be my cardiologist. I don't know who you are. Sure enough, he was her cardiologist. But she was also upset because in his manner, in his style, I remember the man. Hey, by the way, he's not in the area anymore. And he did what some physicians do. He called her grandma. And she lit into him, and she was proud to tell me the story. She said, don't you dare call me grandma. My only son is a Roman Catholic priest, and he has no children, and I'm nobody's grandmother, and get out of here. She really laid into it. Well, I've used her example several times in talking to people. If you're going to be a professional, somehow it seems a little contradictory to try to dress like Huckleberry Finn. Contradictory to my values and standards, not somebody else's. But that's how I look at it. You'd think that, and you see this from time to time, some women know what looks nice for them. They have a style that compliments and flatters them, and they stick to it regardless of what the fashions say. I think that's being smart. Some men may be the same way. I think they ought to settle down. Well, I've also found that if you keep ties long enough, they'll come back in style. I had somebody looking at my house one day, and she said, my goodness, you have ties older than I am. Well, I'll confess, maybe some of them are. Here's another one. Ask about family roles. The question is, families have different roles that children play. Is that still present? Well, not like it used to be, because most families today are very small families comparatively. Two-child family. Some people have a one-child family. I was thinking about the one-child family watching the Olympics, and the Chinese doing great guns in the Olympics. But some of the supporting stories talked about how these children are trained, taken out of the family and trained very intensively. Well, obviously it's successful as far as winning Olympics. But I was thinking these are one-child families. So to take a child out of the family, basically to make them into Olympic competitors, is taking all the children out of that family. I was thinking how sad. Yes, family roles used to be large families. You'd have the smart one, the dumb one, the lazy one, the sick one. You can go through the range of things. And one child was sometimes given the big burden of carrying out these roles. And even some of these things were in the statutes. For example, in some countries, some law, the property inheritance belongs to the eldest child. And the eldest child then has the obligation to provide for the others. That was the intention. And the eldest child, it was a natural sequence to do that, because the eldest child, when life expectancy was short, the parents, probably wouldn't live to see the youngest child hit the teen years. See, when life expectancy was somewhere around 45, at the turn of the 1900th century, 1900, life expectancy was about 47, right at 50 right after that. You can see how many parents lived to see their teenagers grow up. Well, they didn't. So it was logical to turn over the property, the authority, and the responsibility to the eldest child with the expectation to take care of it. And so family roles have been logical in some respects for many years. Here's another one. How do you account for the rapid change in family life participation in religion? Well, it's kind of hard. In 2 generations, we've seen some very dramatic changes in participation in religion. I hear this being referred to oftentimes in the media and even in print, religiosity. And I don't like that word. Religiosity, the suffix osity, or osis, means a condition. And talk about people's religiosity as if that's an ailment. Well, that's not accidental, by the way, with a humanist. The humanists typically believe that, yes, religion is an ailment. The quicker you get over it, the better you'll be. But what we know is that families that practice religion have a better opinion of themselves. They're better for each other. They rear children who seem to get along better in society. And I attribute the main cause of the rapid change being the deliberate, non-religious, atheistic educational programs, where you're not allowed to pray in school, or all kinds of fussing about whether or not somebody's religious or not, or it's going to be offensive to somebody. But most people haven't stopped to really think about that what we have is a government policy of secular humanism. That seems to be the official, yet unadopted by statute, policy of the government. Not to relate to religions. That's on the one hand. And on the other hand, you find all kinds of things like the having prayer in Congress, chaplains in the military, and yet our government's not supposed to foster a particular religion. Well, as long as it doesn't foster a particular religion, that's okay, but secular humanism has been called a religion. But to answer the question, I think, yes, it is the success of the secular humanists who've been pushing this in education, pushing it in schools. As you know, there's been a lot of hullabaloo about 10 Commandments in schools and things like that. Taking them out of the courtroom somewhere in one of the southern states, I've forgotten where. How do I find that a problem? Well, here's another question. This little lady says, I'm nearing 80, and I have a very distinct impression that my doctor relates to me on the basis of my age rather than my condition. Excuse me. Can that be true, she asked. You know, I've heard that from several older people. Of course it can be true. The Group for Advancement of Psychiatry made a big study of this one time and found that it's certainly true among psychiatrists that the treating physician has opinions about the age of people. Some of them don't want to work with old people. Why? Because it reminds them, they said, their studies, it reminds them of their parents. Some people don't want to work with old people because they have a dead end, so to speak. They're not going to become productive citizens. They're going to become less and less productive and more disabled and more dependent. And some people don't want to be around people like that. We've known that for centuries. That's not anything new. Yet in some cultures and society, we used to have a little of it in our culture, there was respect for the elderly, respect for age. But the woman who's asking a question about her physician, treating her on the basis of age, I get that from time to time. I go in nowadays and the doctor say, well, that's due to age. There is no condition or disease called age that I'm aware of. I try to read these things. There's an opinion about some, particularly older people, who don't want a woman physician. I find both men and women, some of them say, I don't want a woman physician, as if that makes a big difference. Well, if it's that opinion, the attitude of the patient, that may make a difference with that patient. I'm not promoting that a physician of one gender or the other is necessarily better. I don't believe it. But also I've heard the opinions, and perhaps some of you have, that about a physician's age. Somebody says, well, that young whippersnapper doesn't know anything. How could he know anything? He's only 40. They believe that the old doctor knows better. Well, on the other side of the coin, I've heard people say, well, science is changing so quickly today that old doctor hadn't been to school. Take the young one, he knows all the latest, he or she, and is much more likely to be up to date. Both things are true. There's no way to get experience except living it, and yet the very latest training and scientific treatments are sometimes really not as available to the older physician or practitioner, are not limited to medicine. Like people in my field, we've had a whole big turnaround. Well, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. Have a good one. Hello, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. First question today has to do with pets. Pets are taking on a major role in society today, aren't they? You go down the aisle in a grocery store and see how much space is devoted to pet foods, things like that. Well, the question was, somebody said, I know somebody who seems to love her dog like some people love children. Is it possible for people to substitute pets for children? And of course the answer is yes. And sometimes that's healthy. Sometimes people need to have something to really invest in emotionally, to care about. And sometimes it's not healthy. If that's what a person has grown up with, not necessarily sick, but I've used pets in therapy sometimes. I remember I was working with a woman one time who had just lost her daughter, Very serious. She was depressed. She didn't have anything to care about. A widow. Lost her only next child. So I got her interested in taking care of some chickens. They worked. She took care of the chickens. She took care of them. She overfed them, and they died. But by the time the chickens died, I'd never heard of chickens dying from being overfed before. But she was over the main thing. Depression went on to do well. I've heard people having pet rocks. I don't have any understanding of that. I've heard of it. Some pets I don't relate to. I asked one of my grandsons the other day, what do you get out of the pet snake? What does the pet snake do for you? And you know, he looked at me like I was about 5 stages past Alzheimer's. I got really lost it. But after he worked on it a while, he never did answer my question. What was it he really got out of this pet snake? It has to have special food and all kinds of things. I'm still wondering. I'm not opposed to snakes. In fact, my daughters used to have pet snakes in the house, but they weren't in a cage. They were loose. And I was a widower at the time, and I remember that I had somebody come in to sit with the girls after school, and about the second day she came up to me and told me, she said, you know, I took this job, and I'm glad, and the children are great, but you're going to have to do something about those snakes. You can't have snakes in the house where I'm going to work. Okay. I needed somebody to come in and sit with the daughters and be with them. But those same daughters today don't like snakes. It's interesting, isn't it? Here's a question that comes up from time to time. I've heard it for years. I used to discuss it and have many discussions with it. People down in the Office on Aging, Tri-County Council on Aging, and others. The question is, do you think retirement causes people to have an early death? And the answer is no. I think the scientific answer, the evidence does not support retirement as such causes early death. What do we run into? We have to look at it. When people retire, their life expectancy is obviously short. Average person retiring at 65 has a life expectancy of a little over 16 years. What does that mean? That means about 16 years, people are going to, about half of them are going to be dead. So they start dying off at a higher rate than they died off, say, between 55 and 65, or between 45 and 55, obviously. So that's what's going on when you see the obituary and say, oh, so-and-so just retired. Yeah, the retirement got him. No, the retirement probably didn't get him. And we used to discuss this in the psychiatric hospital where I worked. We wondered why women who weren't working out in the public seemed to get upset at the retirement of their husband. Until we just stopped to think about it. Here's a woman who'd been head of her household during the day. She managed it. I didn't mean some of them weren't household heads after dark either, but she was used to managing things, putting things where she wanted them, and knew where everything was. And when the old man retired and came home, he was underfoot all day. And he had his opinions. And he had his ways of doing things, which weren't her ways. And for some women, for a while, that seemed to be much more stressful than when the man was working. And that's certainly understandable, isn't it? Because who among us wants somebody to come in and tell us how to do things, and we've been doing them a certain way and putting things in a place, same place, for years and years? None of us really like that. So retirement was a stress for the women. who had not been working. But it wasn't particularly for the man who retired to something. And today, more men and women, of course, working out, more men and women have not only two jobs, but they also dual retirements. So patterns have changed. We didn't used to have retirement. Retirement came into being in the 1930s, really. Before that, nobody really thought much about retiring. Here's a question that's kind of involved. So I think it's important, very important. The question is, has there been a study showing that sex education lowers the rate of out-of-wedlock pregnancies? Yes. There have been some studies on that. And the studies that I've read seem to contradict the need for those programs. And here's the evidence. Several others answer the question that don't support sex education. They compare sex education courses, like Northwestern University did a big study on this. SECUS, sex education in the U.S., funded by federal government, but it did a study. Planned Parenthood's done studies. And the evidence from the studies show that when you do sex education programs with contraception as part of it, and sex education program without contraception, those programs that have included contraception, they have higher rates of pregnancy, more teenage sex, more teenage promiscuity. And remember, most of these, if they're government sponsored in any way, deliberately have no values stance built into them, no moral values built into them. What we're seeing is that sex education programs that stress abstinence, not doing what everybody's afraid of for their kids, if they stress abstinence, they work. Not only do they work, it's interesting, some of the studies show that programs of abstinence, of saving sex until marriage, actually gets people who were already having sex as teenagers to stop having sex, to live chaste lives. So many people think chastity and virginity are interchangeable words. They're not. You have chastity, which means living up to your moral convictions and standards. Now, when I say your moral convictions or standards, presumably based on religious principles. Chastity is purity, and people who are married and may be having sex X number of times a day, a week, or whatever, they can be living chaste lives. Chastity is not dependent on whether or not a person has sex, if the person is married. Be unmarried and having sex, then that's not chaste. Any violation of the moral code is a violation of chastity. Chastity is a renewable resource. Any of us can be chaste if we so choose. That's what's happening in research on sex education. Sex education shows that the people who have a good example at home, whose parents expect them to be chaste, to live chaste lives, that has a much higher success rate than parents who don't set the model. Our children go to these programs in school where sex education is taught, including all kinds of contraceptives. Now, I haven't asked the sponsor of this program for permission to say this, but I'm going to tell you what's really going on in school. Of course, he can censor it. He can turn it off or not show it. But there is a program that's being introduced, and it's being introduced by SECUS, Sex Education, Sex Information Education Council of the U.S., into schools that has its basis. And hang on, by age 5, children should be taught how to masturbate. Starting at age 9, children should be taught that there are several ways. to give and receive pleasure, and hold on to your hat, such as mutual masturbation and oral sex. I wouldn't say that if I hadn't read it and had it on good authority. And by age 16, children should be taught about exploring and enhancing their pleasures with other things, using pornography and photographs and so on. Now, you think about it. Those people who care, you think about it. Is that what's going on in public school? By what rhyme or reason does somebody have the authority to come in and teach children the very things that so often parents have been trying to teach children not to do? I saw a program recently about that business, about the 9-year-olds, third graders and all that. I think it was Dan Rather, one of the programs like that. I believe it was Dan Rather. How shocked the people were to find that the sexual activity of these 9-year-olds, well, we've had a little upheaval recently in our White House, and that was an excuse that was given. Children were practicing what they had heard so much about. That's sad, isn't it? It's sad that there would be a deliberate program. I think it's very sad. And it'd be criminal if I had children in school today. I'm not sure how I would take it. And I don't know that, I looked at the roster of the school board. I don't know that most of these people are aware of it. I intend to take on the job of making some aware of it. Say, look, is this the kind of program you have? If you do, what are you going to do about it? If you don't, keep it that way. School boards are to set major policy in keeping with the community standards. The administrators of the school are to conduct the policy according to all the regulations of the state. But when it comes into the state and even federal government here, funding programs that do that, and then we sit back and we wonder, we have the audacity, the unmitigated gall to wonder what's wrong with the programs, and politicians over here will talk one way about censoring whatever on media, movies, or the internet. Somebody else comes along with some other proposal. Well, let's look at what's going on in the school under the aegis of your tax dollars, under the sponsorship of your tax dollars. I think that's a very serious thing in family life, and it shouldn't be happening. That shouldn't be happening in my book. You know, most people who are trained to do what I worked on to become a sociologist, psychologist years ago, marriage and family counselor, counseling, psychotherapist, we're supposed to be value-free. But I'm not value-free. I don't pretend to be. I think some things are good for society and other things are bad for society, and I see no redeeming virtue. I see no redeeming benefit for a program like that. And it just doesn't make any sense to me. Somebody gets a bright idea that'll sell something. It's not new. It's been proposed a long time ago. I remember seeing this over 30 years ago, being promoted by the same group, by the way, out of New Orleans. I remember watching and being involved in programs down there at that time, and somebody was promoting that sort of thing at that time. Same group. Well, abstinence hasn't been known to hurt anybody. Children who grow up without having sexual involvement hasn't been known to hurt anybody. That's, I think, something we can all agree on. No bad side effects. No diseases come from that. No children. No out-of-wedlock pregnancies. People are healthier and happier. Evidence shows that too. People live happier and healthier lives. How do they work? You work by taking a position that there is importance, that abstinence is of value, controlling oneself is of value, that living up to one's moral standards is of value. It is of value to avoid any threats to your health or health of others. And these work. Evidence shows, and research on these programs show, that we have millions of dollars going into some agencies to teach sex education. And the evidence shows they're not working for the betterment of society. That's my opinion. I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. Have a good day.